But first, last night's pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas protests in Sydney showed shockingly poor judgment by the New South Wales Police, a lack of any preparedness by the New South Wales government to deal with a very foreseeable likelihood of protests like this, especially after what we saw in Greenacre in Sydney on Sunday night, and confirmation this afternoon that the Opera House protest did not even have a police permit. Well, it's all a damning indictment of the Minns government and ministers asleep at the wheel.
Well, I think everybody needs to just calm down and, as you say, do stay at home. This sort of dividing into camps and barracking over what's a horrific situation in the Middle East is just not acceptable. What everybody needs to do is to show restraint and respect and calm down. And
what's the point in lighting up the sales of the Opera House and then telling Jewish people to stay home for their own safety?
I think all people should stay home for their own safety if the streets are unsafe. But
is New South Wales and Sydney unsafe?
Well, I'm confident that the police have got the streets under control, as they always do.
Worse still, this whole past 72-hour period has exposed some of the fault lines in modern Australia. Now, whatever some might think about Israeli government policy or past history in this ancient part of the world, the actions of Hamas, the deliberate and systematic slaughter of innocents, and the callous taking of hostages to be used as human shields, well, we should all condemn that because it is simply evil. Yet, as you saw here last night, a prominent Sydney Muslim cleric was revelling in these atrocities.
I'm smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of happiness. It's a day of pride. It's a day of victory. This is the day we've been waiting for.
Until very recently, that man shared a stage with our Prime Minister. And then last night, those very ugly scenes, a pro-Palestine rally, but let's call it what it is, anti-Israel, anti-Jew, pro-Hamas rally that moved its way from the Sydney City Town Hall down to the Opera House with hundreds of protesters chanting against Israel and spewing racist slurs against Jewish Australians. Now, initially, when I saw those images last night, I was staggered that a protest like this was approved by the police, given the hate and the violence at its core. Why allow it, I thought? Why allow it move from the Town Hall and down to the Opera House, which was bathed in blue and white light in a show of solidarity for the people of Israel? How did it happen, I asked? Where were the ministers, the police chiefs? Because Blind Freddie could have anticipated, after those scenes on Sunday night, that more anti-Israel crowds were likely. Well, this afternoon we discover that last night's Opera House protest was not a legal protest. It was not approved by police. Here's the New South Wales Police Minister, Yasmin Cately, under pressure in State Parliament today.
The police did not approve a march. The process for avoiding protest meetings or marches, known as Form 1, generally takes about a week to complete. There was no Form 1 for this event. After the horrific events in Israel on the weekend, police were closely monitoring the situation and became aware through intelligence and through social media that large numbers could be expected to gather in the city. They needed to manage a highly volatile crowd, and again I say, last night they did that successfully.
Now, the police minister is kidding herself. First up, as I reported to you here last night when the news broke, the idea that New South Wales police can tell Jewish Australians to stay at home, but they can't guarantee their safety on the streets, well, that's intolerable. It cannot be accepted as a new norm in this country. And secondly, if a protest is illegal, if it has no authorisation, then why did the police stand by as they sent up flares and spewed their hate? If the protest is illegal, then lock up the protesters. But that's not what happened, is it? The protesters were able to take over the forecourt at the Opera House and forced Jewish Australians out of Sydney. Not all of them. One man, a businessman, a father of two, Mark Spiro, who turned up with his Israeli flag, hoping to show solidarity with his homeland, was confronted by police and he was arrested. Afterwards, Spiro was released by police after his flag was confiscated and he agreed to staying out of the city for the next 24 hours.
I was literally at the protest for all of probably 3 seconds, literally, with a rolled up Israeli flag, and next thing I know I've got multiple police officers trying to grab the flag off me and then carrying me away from the scene and telling me I'm arrested for breach of the peace. But it was excessive, and at the time having both your arms pinned back for effectively having a rolled up Israeli flag was shocking and confronting, and then being dragged like that, I felt like a rag doll. I'm not a violent person. The people that we are supporting and allowing a platform to celebrate the murder, rape, abduction of children, women, the elderly, are allowed to desecrate one of our most famous sites.
New South Wales Police Command tried to say today that he was arrested for his own safety.
A person was removed from the town hall rally who was carrying a flag for his safety. He was arrested to prevent a breach of the peace for his safety. He was removed and released.
And yet those responsible for the illegal, unauthorised protests calling for the extermination of Israel, death to Jews, even the horrific gas the Jews, were able to go right ahead. Just a warning, the following clip may well be distressing to my viewers. There they are, no intervention from police, no one locked up, no one reprimanded, flares going off and more. We know they did not have a permit, but these protests were illegal, and yet one person arrested. Just the peaceful Jewish man with his flag. How is it all right for protesters to chant those Palestinian slogans, spew their anti-Israel hate and wave the Palestinian flag, but not for another to wave the Israeli flag? All too often, police are too focused on keeping the peace and not enough on enforcing the law. Ever since Saturday, I've heard and read too much that's ignorant and ill-informed about the events that unfolded in Israel. On the facts of what happened at the hands of Hamas, there is no moral equivalence. There is no moral equivalence between organised, well-planned, well-funded terrorism against innocent civilians and the right of a country to protect its borders, its people, and to strike back at terror groups and their leaders. And Australians, regardless of their ethnic background, should be capable of making that distinction. Now, I get the natural interest and sympathy that exists between Australians of Middle Eastern background for the places they've left behind. But it's Australia's national interest that should be foremost and uppermost in their minds, not the animosities that we presume they came to this country to leave behind. The protection and preservation of Israel as a bastion of freedom in a dangerous part of the world is an important national and global interest. Likewise, a less medieval Islam, shorn of its death to the infidel extremism, is a vital national interest. Australia should always stand resolutely against any ideology that promotes hatred based on race or religion. The danger, though, is that some recent migrants might regard themselves in this case as Palestinians resident in Australia rather than Australians of Palestinian background. And we've long valued the cultural richness and diverse migrant backgrounds that people bring to Australia, but only if they leave their old hatreds behind. It'd be good now to hear urgent voices from leaders of Middle Eastern communities in Australia demanding calm, regretting the Israeli dead as well as the Palestinians, and accepting that it's quite right for Australia to support Israel once more under deadly threat. Support Israel as every Australian should, as the world should.